Okay. Ajouter. Hi, Erin, do you hear me? Can you raise a hand if you hear me? Okay, all right. That means the live is working, and we're just going to add you in just a moment. So, bonsoir tout le monde, c'est Nicolas de Mossis Canada. Je suis ici à la Chine avec des membres de Mossis Canada, puis on va, dans un instant, ajouter Erin à notre comme conférencière de la soirée. Est-ce qu'on pourrait avoir un petit silence, s'il vous plaît? S'il vous plaît. So, alors, bonsoir tout le monde. C'est Nicolas de Mossis Canada, comme je disais il y a quelques instants. Et puis, je crois qu'on est en live. Est-ce que je peux avoir le test de quelqu'un qui voit le... Will, peux-tu me dire si le live fonctionne sur ton téléphone? Et on a Erin Wilson, qui est une biologiste de la région de Ottawa-Montréal. Erin, I don't know exactly which city you live in, but you'll be able to tell us when you join the session in just a moment. Alors, en vertu du meeting de mois de mars qui était cédulé pour le 5 mars, ce soir, c'est une reprise, c'est le 12 mars. Erin, you were sick last time, so we are rebroadcasting tonight instead of March 5th. We are starting out on March 12th. And I'd like to welcome you to our session, Muskies Canada, Montreal. I appreciate you taking the time from your home in your studies. I think you're taking exams tonight or this week. So I really thank you for joining us. And Pierre will add you to the studio in a few seconds, just when I'm done with the introduction. Tonight in Montreal, we are about close to 40 people. And Pierre is my colleague, is running the show. We had a few audio issues up until now. And we're going to let you start, our internet friends. What? So just a moment. We're having some audio issues with our MC. So just a moment. Pierre. Si tu l'ajoutes au studio, elle va pouvoir parler, puis on ne va pas l'entendre, mais les internautes vont l'entendre. OK. Alors, dans quelques instants, on va reprendre le calme de notre MC qui va ajouter. Erin, we're just going to add you in a minute. And Pierre is adding the sound to television. So if you'll just stay online for a few minutes, on va commencer avec Erin dans 2 minutes, aussitôt que Pierre réussit à brancher un fil HDMI à une autre entrée. J'apprécie votre patience en attendant. Carole, as-tu la télécommande pour allumer la télé? Là. OK. OK. Ça s'en vient. Okay, so Pierre, can you add Erin to the... On va arranger ça après. Premièrement, concentre sur elle pour la mettre sur le screen, puis elle va commencer ça. Puis nous, on va ajuster le son par après.
Welcome.
Okay, welcome, Erin. And we're just going to figure out the sound. Pierre is playing with the sound. We don't hear you yet, so thank you for joining us. And maybe do a test 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, everyone.
He's going to add your input. I can hear myself echo on the outputs of a phone next to me, so I know that it is working. We're broadcasting on the internet, but we're just trying to add the sound so that we can add you. There we are. Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Okay, so please mute me, Pierre, and Erin, it's your turn.
Okay. So, hi, everyone. My name's Erin, obviously. I currently am in Ottawa right now, just finishing up my master's degree where I'm studying muskie, but I am originally from Port Hope. I just want to say that, like, thank you for having me tonight. You know, before I even became interested in fisheries biology. I was an angler ever since I was a little girl. I took a real loving to muskie fishing when I was probably around 19 years old, and I was doing my undergrad at Guelph in fisheries biology. And yeah, the two just kind of merged together in my master's, and now I'm studying muskie biology. So super fun. I'm almost finished, so I have some really interesting results from my studies that I'd love to share tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so for my master's degree, I focused on investigating the seasonal movement ecology and fine scale post release behavior of our beloved muskies. Now, I just want to take a quick moment to acknowledge both my research team, Dr. Stephen Cook, Dr. Sean Landsman are my advisors. Caitlin Cunningham is a student I worked very closely along with for the Petawawa project for my first chapter. Luke LaRochelle for my second chapter. He's also a PhD student at Carleton. And then I just want to quickly thank my financial partners. Muskies Canada, huge. Thank you very much for your support in volunteering and with financial stuff as well. Carleton University, the Canadian Wildlife Federation, Izoko, which is actually located right in Montreal. They've supported us through the donations of baits, rods, reels. I had a reel blow up last summer, and I had a tranx shipped to me next day. So customer service is unreal there. But yeah, so just wanted to say a quick thanks to all of my partners. So my overall thesis goal is to provide valuable ecological and behavioral insights on muskie in the realm of spatial movement ecology, as well as catch and release angling. So this took form in two separate chapters. Each season I spent focusing on one chapter. So chapter one was evaluating the seasonal movement behaviors of muskie using acoustic telemetry in a small remote lake up in Algonquin Park. And then for chapter two, I investigated the post-release behavior of muskie across water temperatures with the application of these novel pop-off biologgers in order to inform future handling practices of muskies. So to start off with chapter one, my study site was Lake Trevere, which I mentioned was located in Algonquin Park within Ontario, in the more like northeastern section. So Lake Trevere is a 10-kilometer section actually situated within the Petawawa River. The Petawawa River is free flowing into the Ottawa River, so it is not currently dammed, and it is one of the largest rivers to flow into the Ottawa River that isn't dammed at all. So very natural system, which is great. I know we don't have a lot of those left, unfortunately. And then what goes hand in hand with that is that this lake has had very little exposure to anthropogenic stressors due to the strict park regulations. So in this lake, you are allowed to bring in a boat, which actually is not allowed through like most of the lakes in Algonquin Park, but you are allowed to bring a boat. It just has to be under 10 horsepower. So only small boats allowed, and you're only allowed to camp within this lake. What's interesting about Lake Trevere is that it could be of ecological significance in relation to the Petawawa River system as a whole. It is home to a completely naturally reproducing muskie population. And what we think about Lake Trevere is that it could be a key provider of spawning areas and nursery habitat. And it could act as a source of spawning stock for the large portion of the downstream Petawawa River. So we think these muskies are using this lake for spawning habitat, and then they could be moving downstream into the Petawawa River. So what we currently know about movement trends of muskie, seasonal changes obviously play a really significant role in determining their habitat preferences and their behaviors. They show different movements, and they have different preferences depending on the season, where you'll find muskies in the winter might not be the same in the summer. And then secondly, we often see large increases in movement, especially during the spring, due to spawning for obvious reasons. They're migrating to their spawning habitat, but as well in the fall due to the migration to their overwintering habitat. Oftentimes, muskie display spawning site fidelity, which means year after year, they tend to return to the same spawning areas. And this is really key. I really want to highlight that because they show this fidelity to spawning areas, it's really key to protect these areas. If a muskie returns and this habitat has been destroyed, we often see less successful spawns happening, which obviously lowers recruitment, which we don't want. And then residency behavior is also often displayed with muskies during the summer. So we know as anglers, sometimes we'll fish a spot and we'll see the same muskie like twice in the summer on the same spot. And this has been, proven through telemetry that they do show residency to certain areas within the system during the summer. And so my research question, or my objective of this study was to use acoustic telemetry to characterize the movements and the distribution of muskie in Lake Trevair over a 1-year period. And therefore, my specific research questions included what are the overall seasonal movement patterns of muskie in Lake Trevair? What are the residency patterns of muskies in this lake related to the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream sections? And where in this lake do they overwinter, and where do they spawn? So what's particularly interesting about this lake that we kind of noticed right away is that it can be essentially broken up to 3 really distinct sections. And so the most upstream section here is quite wide compared to the rest of the lake, and it is quite shallow, and it has very similar depths throughout, about 10 feet through that whole section. And because it is so wide, there is minimal flow here. There's sandy and mud substrate, and then right here, it is quite shallow, and there's a lot of vegetation growth here in the summer, and then kind of moving more into that like midsection, there is quite a bit of vegetation here as well. But yeah, so that's that section. And then as we move into the midsection, it starts to narrow. So flow starts to increase. We've got differing depths happening here. We have some deeper holes. It could be anywhere from like 10 to 20 feet throughout here. It's a little bit different throughout. It's not all the same. And then we have differing substrates here. So we've got cobble, we've got pebble, sand, mud. We've got some sections with some boulders. And then we also have weed beds here as well. Not as dense and wide, but there are definitely some weed patches throughout here. And then as we move into this last kind of section is definitely more riverine in nature because it starts to really narrow. Flow increases substantially. Depths are now ranging anywhere from 10 feet to 30 feet. So there's deeper holes in here that come up to weed beds and weed flats and then go back down. The habitat varies quite a lot throughout here. And then substrate includes everything, large boulders, sand, mud, cobble. Yeah, everything is throughout here. So in order to tag these muskies, it was strictly done through angling, just due to how remote this lake is. We can't be bringing in, a big electrofishing boat here. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is it possible that you put your slides in full screen mode? Then we'll see them.
Is it in presenter mode?
No, it's not. If you can put them in full screen mode, that'll be might be a little easier. I don't know if you can, but if you can try, but at least I'll let you continue. But if you can try to go full screen, it'll be a lot easier to see you. Okay?
Okay,
I'll give it back to you. Thanks.
Is it okay? Is it now? Is it in full screen now? Oops. I need to go back down to. Is that better?
So Erin, you can probably hear me now.
Yeah.
There should be in your menu like a view, and then you can go full screen, or a little icon on the bottom. Because we see your slide deck with the slides on the left, and so your slide is really small. We see all your application. So there must be a
Oh,
way you
okay.
can go to full screen. Yeah, just go in presenter mode, like if you can.
Um, is it right? Okay. Like, yeah, I hit that, and then is that better? Because it's like in presenter mode for me. I don't know what to do about that. Um, Maybe if I turn back. Um, so I think it's like because I have a window, like I see what you mean.
Okay, we can just continue. I think that's it's fine if we just go on. I don't know if you can hear me. Let's just continue. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay. I'll try this instead. Okay. So, yeah, as I was saying, so all of the fish were caught strictly by angling to tag them, and only adult muskellunge were tagged because we wanted to look at spawning habitat stuff, and if we tagged juveniles, that would kind of skew the data. So we started for them opener weekend, so that was June 3rd. Now Katie is working on kind of like a partner project throughout the whole Petawawa River. And what we kind of noticed was that a lot of our smaller fish were being caught in Lake Trevair. So a lot of like 30-inch, 35-inch muskies. I think our largest tagged in Trevair was 36 inches. But as we were sampling downstream, Petawawa, in some of those downstream lakes, we were catching much larger individuals, which kind of is driving home that hypothesis that we thought of, where Lake Trevair is kind of used as a spawning lake, and then these larger individuals kind of leave and access like deeper areas with more structure and stuff like that. And then, yeah, angling continued until late October, basically until we could no longer camp in a tent. So it got pretty cold out there, and we ended up tagging 20 21 muskies for Lake Trevere. I think we tagged another 16 or so for the rest of the river. And yeah, these are just some photos of our tagging procedures. So yeah, it is a surgery. So basically what we have here, we have these kind of like electro anesthesia gloves. So it keeps the fish completely still while we're making the small incision to insert the tag. This yellow stuff is betadine to keep everything sterile. And then we have fresh lake water flowing over the gills to make sure this fish is nice and healthy and strong to be released. This process is pretty quick. It's a very small incision. And then the nice thing is that we did have a couple recaptures of our tagged muskies, so we were able to, recapture this muskie a couple months later, look at the incision site, and confirm that these fish were healing properly, which was kind of nice. Yeah, and these are just some release shots. I think this was the 47-inch one from downstream Petawawa, but yeah, as you can see, the rest of the muskie were kind of small in Trevere. And so yeah, what exactly is acoustic telemetry? I'm sure everyone's maybe heard of it before, maybe not, but it's basically just a really powerful tool that allows us researchers to track and monitor fish movements remotely. So basically, we start off with a small tag, and each tag transmits a unique signal for each individual fish. As I mentioned before, this tag is then surgically implanted into the fish. And then we have these underwater receivers. They're kind of like the size of a wine bottle. And they're deployed throughout the system you're interested in. And they actively sit at the bottom and they kind of listen for those tags to go by. And what we end up with is detections from each individual fish. And then as you put it together in a whole system, we're able to, do a bunch of stuff with that data, look at movements, habitat preferences, stuff like that. To deploy the receivers, so they sit about 3 feet off of the bottom. So we have a sandbag as anchors because we can't really, bring in, tires, for example, into Algonquin Park. And then it's attached to a rope. And then the rope kind of goes up to this buoy here, and that kind of sits 3 feet under the surface, kind of hidden away from the general public, just so they don't mess with our equipment. But deployment was a little challenging just because in some of these spots, you can't bring a boat in, so we'd have to do it by canoe. And when you're flinging like 70-pound sandbags over the side of a canoe, you could tip. So it was definitely interesting. Yeah, and this is just some more photos of our receiver deployment fieldwork, and we were able to deploy some receivers at some really beautiful spots. I love this photo too, some sunsets. Yeah, just being out in super remote lakes is a lot of fun. So for my lake, for Lake Trevere, I did deploy 16 receivers, and this is where they were deployed within the lake. So we kind of went with more of this like gate structuring system to ensure that we'd get individuals kind of moving up and down the lake. And then this is an animation of one of the individuals we tagged. So this was a 36-inch muskie, and it was tagged June 4th. And yeah, this is just an animation of its movements over a 1-year period. So this was one of the first things I did with my data was run these like animations. And what I kind of noticed right off the bat, for this individual, anyways, it definitely showed high residency to this main point here. Um, and it makes sense to me. We've got like a nice weed bed here. The main channel kind of throws goes through here. This point is a big sand point that comes way out. I think there's really good ambush spots for this individual, stuff like that. And then as we started transitioning into the fall, you could see this individual making more movements, larger movements across the lake. Um, and then as we got into winter, this individual was really moving a lot, large distances, wasn't staying resident to one area of the lake, was just kind of utilizing it all, um, which I personally found a little surprising because what I've always read about muskies and what I've, learned about them is that in the winter, like they hunker down and they kind of stay in those deeper areas and they don't move a lot in the winter just due to their metabolism and all that stuff. But in this study, I'm actually seeing otherwise, which is really interesting. Um, and then as we transition to this into spring, you see movement as well. And then back into the summer, he goes back to that spot and kind of stays resident to that area. Now, another really interesting individual from this study was this guy. He was 31 inches and he was tagged on July 15th. He spent some time in Trevere. He made his way downstream Trevere, leaving Lake Trevere, and he actually passed this class 2 rapid, which is kind of high velocity. And then he made it past this receiver, which is really notable because um, past this receiver is the largest rapid in the Petawawa system, Crooked Chute. It's a class 4 rapid, which means really high velocity, whitewater, dangerous, really difficult. And this fish actually made it past there. But what's most notable is that it made its way back through that rapid and then back through the class 2 rapid and then back into Trevere to overwinter. Um, and then, and then stays in Trevere. Um, so a really large part of the Petawawa project was to kind of investigate these natural barriers within the system. So these rapids, can they make it through the rapids? Can they not? We don't know a lot about that. The only kind of information we know about muskies is through dams, and that they can escape dams, they can make it through. Um, a rapid is, I guess, kind of similar to a dam, but this study is definitely proving us wrong. I did not think this fish would be able to make it through Crooked Chute. It's such high velocity. It's almost like a waterfall, and this fish did, and it just proves that these fish are using the entirety of the system, and that maybe this population is not as segregated as we thought, where there might be an upstream population and a downstream population. They may actually be mixing, which is super interesting. Um, and then, yeah, as I was kind of mentioning before with that animation, what I found most surprising is the movement that these muskies are making during the winter. So this graph is just we've got temperature here, which follows a very normal curve where in the summer it's warm, winter it goes right down, and then this is the movement curve of all of the individuals. Now, in summer, they are not moving as much. And then as we transition into the fall, they're moving a little bit more, but their peak movements are happening during the winter, which is opposite of what, I feel a lot of us have been told, a lot of what I've read. And I think what's really important of like and what like I want this like what I want people to take away from the study is that oftentimes things can get really generalized. So, we have one study on this and we conclude that muskies are not as active in the winter. And then it's studies like these that are like, well, things are different when comparing populations and systems. And, maybe we make one policy for this system based on another system, and it's not actually accurate. And so I think this really just highlights how different systems can be and how different populations act within their systems. There's a lot of variables here at play. And yeah, I just found this super interesting. It goes against what I've always been told. So yeah, that was cool. And then this is simply just the residency. So how much they stay in an area when compared to temperature, not as large as an effect as their movement rates. And kind of, yeah, in the winter, they're less resident to certain spots. It makes sense. They're on the move. And then in the summer, their residency goes up as expected. So yeah, that was chapter 1. I actually just finished all of the analysis, the discussion like today. So that was kind of really interesting. And then, yeah, now I'm working on chapter 2. I haven't completely finished the analysis, but I do have some cool preliminary stuff to share. So, but yeah, chapter 2 focused more on muskie catch and release angling. So as we know, as a community, we have extremely high catch and release ethics among muskie anglers. It's one of the highest in any species seen, which is, I think it's fantastic. But what goes hand in hand in this is the demand for recommendations on proper gear, better handling procedures, and landing methods. And due to the diligent efforts of Muskies Canada, of this community, our muskie populations now contain, trophy-sized individuals that are often recaptured because of catch and release and taking care of your catches. And within our community, there's it's really highly prevalent that we don't fish for muskies in warm water. So any water temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, we believe results in substantial mortality. And my professor, Sean Landsman, in his master's, he sampled up to 26 degrees Celsius and obviously found that muskies experience heightened stress, especially when air exposed, as water temperature warmed. So air exposure with fish is probably the number one factor that contributes to stress and how they're going to behave post-release. This is across all species. So yeah, really important to take that home. There's not a lot of studies that looked into this specifically. There are a couple, but one study included post-release behaviors from non-specialized muskie gear. So they were including muskie that were caught on light gear. I just don't think that's representative of the muskie angling community. Yes, it's prevalent to know what happens, but I wanted to take more of the approach from the muskie angling community and using proper gear in my study. Another study looked at it, but they did not look at the post-release behavior. They only assessed mortality. And then another study just didn't test different handling procedures such as air exposure times, net times, and handling times. So the objective of chapter 2 was to use these novel pop-off biologgers to assess the post-release behavior of muskies captured at a range of different temperatures. Now, I did want to have a special focus on those warm water periods when temperatures are above 25 degrees Celsius. And so the specific research questions included how do released muskies behave and change during the short-term period, so about 12 hours following an angling event. How does behavior, such as depth selection and their locomotory activity, change across different temperatures? And then how do differences in handling procedures, specifically air exposure times, as well as the size of fish, equate to differences in post-release behavior? So this study took place on both the Rideau River in Ottawa, and then in the Kawartha Lakes, so specifically on pigeon, Cameron, buckhorn, and sturgeon. Um, the Kawartha Lakes is where I kind of grew up fishing, so it was easily accessible for me, and it worked really well with the pop-off biologgers. Um, so as I was mentioning before, standardized musky angling gear was strictly used. I only used extra heavy rods, large reels, like 400 tranks, 65-pound test braided line or higher. If I took out volunteers, that would basically be the minimum. I usually run 80-pound test. But yeah, just I had those standards just kind of set. So the angling took place from June to November, so during a regular musky angling season. I recorded air exposure times, net times, and overall handling times. As I was mentioning before, a particular emphasis was taken to target muskies in water temperatures over 25 degrees Celsius. And then my target sample size was 25. So I just want to kind of explain what these little pop-off biologgers are. So they contain a radio transmitter as well as an internal biologger. Now the internal biologger, it records the acceleration of the fish while it's attached, the water temperatures these fish access, as well as depths while it's on. These tags were temporarily affixed to the fish using catgut suture. What's interesting about the suture material is that it disintegrates in fresh water. And so these tags, I'd have some tags stay on for 30 minutes because musky are musky and they're gonna burst away, and that's just gonna naturally break the tag off the muskie. But I did have some that stayed on for 5 days. So it's definitely not as predictable as saltwater, for example. With saltwater pop-off tags, they use metal. And so metal corrodes and these tags pop off at a more predictable rate. But yeah, this is very new technology. So we're just kind of doing what we can and using the technology that we have. So, and then attached to the tags were radio transmitters. So once the tag popped off the fish, I'd go and radio locate them so that I could find them. And then I could download the data. So I ended up with a total of 24 muskies. The average, I meant to change this into inches for anglers, but I ended up with an average length of 911 millimeters, which I think is about, I want to say 35 inches. The max length was almost 1200 millimeters, which I think is 42 inches. And then the smallest muskie I tagged was 29 inches. So yeah, some of the preliminary findings, I haven't run the analysis yet on this chapter, but I'm doing that like next week. So I would love to come back and, give a full update on that. But I do have some preliminary stuff I can discuss today. So this individual was about 32 inches. It had 80 seconds of air exposure, 2 minutes and 30 seconds of net time. And the surface temperature when this individual was caught was 22 degrees Celsius. Now, what we noticed right off the bat with post-release behavior is that, and I've seen it even before the study where you release a muskie and they immediately go down to bottom. And if the lake's clear enough, you can see them sitting on bottom, actively recovering. And that's basically what this graph is showing. This fish is going right down to bottom and is resting. And I call it their sulking period. They're they're resting, they're recuperating. And then, anywhere between, I've seen, like, just looking at my data, anywhere between 30 minutes to like an hour and a half, 2 hours, they kind of return to this like normal. I use normal very loosely because we don't have preliminary stuff, but they kind of return to this activity pattern where they're going up the water column, they're going down, they're changing depths, which is a really good sign of recovery, because that means they're using their swim bladder. They're using physiological structures within them, and they kind of are returning to their kind of normal activity. So yeah, this is definitely a pattern that we've seen right away in almost all of the individuals we've caught, where there's this really obvious recovery period. And so what we're trying to do actively right now is look at the acceleration data as well as that kind of depth data that was on the last slide. And a lot of the fish are following this pattern as well, where when they're released, they're bursting down to the bottom and they're resting. So these blue dots is basically just showing their acceleration, and we've kind of split it up into 3 different activities. So resting, swimming, and bursting. So immediately following release, we have them resting, and then slowly over the course of past 100 minutes, they start swimming, and then they return into this like bursting activity. And what we've kind of noticed is like, okay, so their first bursting event, maybe we could consider a fish recovered, and then we can compare how long it took that fish to recover against, like I was saying, like air exposure times, water temperature, net times, and compare it that way. And then when we relate this back to kind of that depth graph, which this is just a change in depth over minutes post-released, we can see this really obvious resting period, kind of similar to the other graph, where this fish is making no depth change like at all. It's staying on the bottom. And then following the same kind of pattern as their acceleration data, they make a very large change in depth and then smaller changes over the course of the rest of the study time. So relating these two together, I think we'll be able to come up with like a pretty cool metric to kind of see when a fish is recovered. But that's kind of all that we have so far. But yeah, if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about anything, but thank you for listening.
Okay, Erin, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So there's just a sound issue. Pierre's going to take care of it. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Pierre. So you had a slide a few moments ago where you, when you released the fish, and then you had a time scale. I didn't understand the time scale. It said 21:60. Can you go back a couple of slides where you had after the net, the air time and the net time, and then you had the spikes in your graph? You can bring that graph back. Pierre will show it on screen, and then I'll ask you a question once Pierre puts it on.
Was it better when I shared the second time?
It was.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm so glad.
Right.
Okay, good. I didn't know what.
So, there we go. Yeah, this one. Okay, so Pierre's gonna. Okay, this. So what is the time scale? So what I see is it's 21:10, 21:0. Is that the time day?
So that is just strictly the time of day. Yeah. So like 21 would be, I'm horrible at military time. Would have been probably around what? I'm so bad. Like 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then this would have been at night.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do those spikes mean? Does it mean it goes up for air?
That's what we are also trying to figure out, why the muskie are doing this.
Right.
And every single individual has done this. They rest and then they go up and down the water column like constantly.
Okay. Maybe that's what we see muskies doing sometimes. They go up for air and they kind of glide And
Yeah.
we don't see that after a catch. I guess we see it just randomly, but it seems that they do it. Data shows that they do that after being caught. They'll go up and you know go like a submarine. They'll come up to the surface and do that at 20 times up, even until the next morning almost. And then, do you have the graph beyond that to see if when they stop taking that behavior?
So they actually don't stop. Like every single graph, it continues. Like there might be like, a couple like this, for instance, where they're not doing it constantly, but pretty much every individual continues this behavior for the entirety of like the tag being on them.
Okay, so then the anomaly is the 2 hours after they're caught, they'll go on the bottom and rest, and then their normal activity is to come up to water depth like the Red October and get air every hour or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Which like you always hear it within like the angling community, like, oh, like you ever see muskies right at the surface, like, and they're
Exactly.
right doing that, and no one knows why. And I think it's really interesting to study why they're doing this, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for answering the question. Are we at the question period now of your
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to see if my members have any questions to ask you. So I'll get my colleague Bill here. He's going to put the headset on so he can hear you, and then he'll pose his question. And if Bill, if you need slides, you just let her know, and she'll move her slides. You don't? Okay. So it's a general question from my colleague Bill. So here goes the headset. Put that on.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Across Lake Traverse, you said there were 3 zones. The entrance where the river runs into it
Yeah.
is very shallow. How hot does that get in the summer? And do the fish stay there if it's too hot?
So that's a good question. My closest receiver is right behind that big rock that comes out. Like, you've been there, I'm assuming?
Not for a while.
Okay, yeah. So you know how there's that you come to the entrance, there's that huge rock that comes out, you go past the rock. So my one receiver is right behind there. And there was not high residency there. So not a lot of fish were hanging out there, which is contradictory to where we were catching them, because we would catch them there quite often. But I think the highest, let me look at my graph. I think the highest temperature I had, because I had a temp logger on that receiver. I think the
River temperature.
Yeah, the highest it would have gotten was probably around 25 degrees Celsius. So not crazy warm, but with that area, there's a lot of current and a lot of mixing going on. So that area wouldn't get as warm as like when it starts to widen and the current slows.
So further down the lake, it's a higher temperature, probably in the 80s in the summer.
Yeah, like especially on that right side where it's really shallow, there's not a lot of current going through it. It's really wide. I would probably guess it would get pretty warm. But like right at the entrance, there's a lot of flow. Like that rapid that enters into Javert is actually the class 5 rapid. So
yeah,
lots of flow. Yeah.
Thank
Which causes mixing and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for your question. Okay, I see myself on the screen. So, Erin, I've got another question about your bio tag, the new type. How much does one of those things cost?
About like $1,500 to $2,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you go back and recover them, because you can still track them once they're released, right? So did you find them all back?
I lost 3 of them. So in the Rideau, we had one one where we're pretty sure the radio transmitter actually fell off of the biologger package because we were hearing it, we were actively tracking it, and we couldn't find it anywhere. We couldn't see the orange tag anywhere. We had another tag because muskies hang out in weeds, obviously. It's just kind of around their body. We had one tag get stuck like deep into submerged vegetation, so we couldn't recover that one. We tried using an underwater drone, stuff like that. And then I lost one in the Kawartha Lakes, and I spent 4 days going all around sturgeon, the entire perimeter. And it's possible that someone took it. It's possible it floated off into who knows. But yeah, we did lose 3, which sucks because you're missing that data, but as well as like the cost of it. And then I did have some cottage owners. There's a phone number on them, so I had some cottage owners actually phone me and be like, "Hey, we found your tag." And I'm like, "Awesome, come pick it up. That's great." But yeah, what was nice about this though is that Luc La Rochelle, he actually invented this. He came up with the idea. Huge shout out to him. So he already had all of the tags ready to go, so we didn't actually have to go out and purchase them, which was huge. We just had to replace the ones that we lost. So
Okay. How long do they transmit for once they're they're turned on? For 3 days and then they stop transmitting, or?
So I'm actually not 100% sure. Like the longest that the tag stayed, like the longest one tag stayed on a fish was 5 days, and it collected data that entire time. I'd have to ask Luke, but I'm assuming probably actually he did a study on northern pike, and I think the longest he had a tag on for that study was I want to say 2 weeks. It's just a matter of trying to get the tag to stay on the fish. That's what's most difficult, because it's not saltwater, like I was saying. It's not predictable. It's just kind of this suture material that could pop. Like the fish could, I've released fish and it just popped off. It just right when to release it, the tag fell off, and that's that. And there's nothing you can do, kind of thing. So.
Great. Thanks for the question. I've got another colleague here. You know this guy. He's going to ask you a question.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Hi. So we heard quite often Jimmy Sebastian talk about this project and all your work you did down there, and you talking about scientific data and scientific things, but I'm pretty sure it's not like waters around Montreal over there. It's deep in the park over there. So how is it for you to make this study happen? So are you camping on a soil mattress and in the mosquitoes and stuff? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's extremely deep into the park. It's an hour drive into Algonquin Park, which is completely remote. You don't have cell service, you don't have electricity, nothing. It's backcountry camping. So Katie and I would load up our boat. For Lake Trevere, anyways, we were able to use a motor, which was nice. We had a 3.5 horsepower little dinghy motor, and we'd load up the boat. We'd go to a campsite, set up camp in a tent. I had a sleeping pad. It broke, halfway through my field season. So it got to the point where I was just sleeping on the ground, and you just kind of rough it. And yeah, I think, you know what, honestly, mosquitoes don't even bother me anymore. Mosquitoes, I could care less about. They're not annoying. It's the black flies. In May, when we were doing those receiver deployments, in the first week, the opening week of muskie 2 summers ago, the black flies were just like I don't know if I have the photo, but one of our volunteers, you couldn't even see the color of his shirt because there were so many black flies on him. And you'd eat dinner and you just pretend that the black flies were pepper flakes. It's great. But with all that being said, yes, camping for 7 months in the bush, like you're gonna have your ups and your downs. I would definitely say there were a lot more ups than downs. I've learned a lot. I've learned, for instance, there's not a Canadian Tire down the road if anything happens to your boat, to your motor, to any of your electrical stuff, your graphs. Like, you need to learn how to fix things in the moment so that this project kind of continues on. And then for the Petawawa project as a whole, like, we'd be canoeing down the Petawawa River. We couldn't even take motorboats. So you are like interior. So if things go wrong, yeah, you can't, like, you just got to figure it out. Which, my problem solving skills have definitely increased, which I'm very thankful for. But yeah.
Great. So I wanted to ask you a couple, just maybe one or two more questions. So how crucial was Jamie to making this happen? Is his service part of taking you to the muskie and catching them? Was I guess it was last year where some of the trips you made were with Jamie and some with other people on your own or another group, or was it always with Jamie?
So yeah, so this is 2 summers ago. Last summer, like, we didn't do any like muskie tagging. We were finished, but yeah, 2 summers ago. Yeah, like Jamie was there from day one. He helped us, receiver deployments. He knows the lake the best. He knew, the depths here, the depths there. Like you don't have charts of these lakes, so we didn't have any auto charting data. So he would provide, here's a good spot. It's 20 feet here. I think that'd be good for a receiver. Helped us place those. He rallied up volunteers. Like, our first week we went out, we had, a bunch of volunteers braving the black flies, roughing it, helping us tag fish, which you're so thankful for. Yeah, huge contributor. Like, yeah, he's great. He came out with us obviously the most. He contributed a lot of his time that he didn't have to, and provided, really valuable knowledge. It's, I grew up, let's say, like, what's really interesting about the system, I grew up fishing like the Kawartha Lakes, where, you're not running into crazy white water and they're not living like in a river. What's interesting about the system is these muskies like to hang out in current. A lot of the fish we've caught were, right in the white water and eddies, and like, I don't blame them. It's good ambush spots. But I went into it thinking I'd be fishing just weed beds, and that's just not the case in the system. So having the knowledge from someone who has the experience on the system to kind of help you out is definitely invaluable. So yeah.
Cool. Okay, here we are. So I just had to wait till Pierre turned the microphone back on because there's a bit of echo. It's difficult to have a session when at the same time we're broadcasting the sound to our room here behind me. So that's why we have to play a little bit of this. Sorry about the beginning, how it was a bit rough, but we figured it out. And our audience on the internet was also, they didn't notice too much except the clumsiness in the beginning. So I don't know if there's any more. There's another question. So, okay. I don't know if this one will be in English. Okay, so here's I think we'll go for one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. And I'll give say a little thing at the end. So here's your last question. Thank you, Erin.
Hi. So the work you've done on Lake Traverse is awesome and everything. And I was wondering, once you gather all the data that you were looking for, like, what would be the next big projects? That is there anything in the plans for the future?
Yeah. So the next kind of thing, I guess, Muskies Canada can expect would be Katie's results from her kind of partnering project of the Petawawa as a whole. So I'm just doing my master's, so I only had the 2 years to study Lake Traverse, so I could only do a part of the Petawawa. But she's looking at the Petawawa River as a whole. She's doing sturgeon stuff. She's doing muskie genetic stuff, which is really going to be interesting because it's going to show whether these upstream populations and these downstream populations are segregated, or if they're mixing. There's so much to come from her PhD work. That's going to be really exciting. yeah, I'm not going to spoil too much, but like I was there beside her, helping her do her work as well. So that's kind of what is going to be next for sure.
Mic microphone, Pierre? Okay, so I'm back on the microphone here. So Erin, I wanted to say thank you very much. Your presentation was excellent, and our friends on the internet heard you well. We just had a few audio glitches, as I mentioned. So thank you so much. And as a little thank you, we're going to send you a hat like this one. We're going to choose a red one because it has to match, you know, the Canada's not for sale kind of feel. So we're going to send you a red one. And we're going to send you a ruler as well. And that ruler you can use for participation in our tournament for pike. We have an ecological tournament for pike where it's all catch and release. It's used on a ruler, uses an app. So all the fish go back into into their spawning areas, or because it's right after the spawn. And all the data goes to the MNR, well, the Quebec Ministry of the Environment. So they use the picture data. So it's really, it goes with what you do. It's a biologically aware tournament. So we're going to send you a ruler, and you're going to be able to get a participation for a team of between 1 and 4 people. And you just have to make it to our waters, Quebec waters, just outside of Ottawa. It's in May. So I'll send that your way. And if you don't use it, you can lend the ruler for somebody who can do the tournament, anybody you know. But if you want to make it, it's May 3rd, and we'll get that out to you. Okay. So we're going to take the Muskie Express and get you that stuff over to Carleton or to wherever you are in the Ottawa region.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I do a lot of pike fishing in the spring. I think it's a really good warm up to the muskie season that comes up. So thank you very much. Is that through Fish Donkey?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's like it's, you know, I mean, you might have seen from Aaron Weeb. He does a bunch of tournaments that way. So we do something similar. So it's the biggest pike tournament in the world. So we'll see you in the tournament with everybody. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for listening.
Okay. All right. And so we'll wish you a good night here so everybody here will say good night and give you a little hand of applause. So as you can see, we even have women representatives here as well.
I see. That's awesome.
You might have seen. Okay. Thank you so much, and have a good night. And Pierre will end the broadcast, and I'll say a little something to our listeners. So good night to you, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much.
Bye. OK. Alors, c'est avec ça qu'on termine le meeting de ce soir. Donc, j'aimerais remercier tout le monde qui était sur les ondes ce soir. On va archiver le meeting pour le futur. Et on va se voir bientôt à une autre soirée de Muskies Canada TV. C'est Nicolas Perrier avec Muskies Canada Montréal. Bonne soirée à tous.